Right, let's get started. Well, welcome everybody. If you haven't got a chance yet, please introduce yourself in the chat. Really nice to see all the wonderful things that are making people happy this week. A couple of highlights. Kathleen's son, I believe, is getting married. Rich's son and his family are coming home for Christmas, planning to, first time in 7 years. They haven't been back to North Dakota because they live abroad. Fall weather up and down the East Coast, out in Alaska, parts of the Midwest, really sort of bringing people a lot of joy. So just delightful. If you haven't got a chance to scroll through what other folks said, please do. If you haven't got a chance to introduce yourself, please do. I think probably the biggest thing bringing me joy this week, among lots of other things, and being here with you is I'm in New York, and so got to go see real theater for the first time in almost 2 years, and saw a musical called Hamilton, which many of you will be familiar with, and I forgot that live events could be this great. So strong recommend for folks. It was also really interesting to watch Broadway reopen, and you have 2,000 people all sitting calmly with masks on in New York. Very different experience than the last time I was there, but pretty great show, and really delighted to also be supporting so many actors and actresses and orchestra members and set designers and everything else, because it's been a really rough year for the folks I know in acting, and I'm sure many of you know in arts and culture. So delighted to do that. Let's dive in here. We are going to talk about older donors, and we're going to talk about how to maximize year-end giving. So we'll talk about what's changing in the world of older donors. What does that mean broadly for the world of fundraising? And then what specifically do we do about it? Many of you will know this, but thanks to my colleague Simone and my colleague Amanda, who is helping out today, this event is CFRE approved for 1.0 credits. What that means is that this counts towards your professional education if you're part of that whole process. If not, don't worry about it, but it's something we like to do because we know that professional development budgets have been reduced at a lot of places. And so hopefully we can help a little bit by making this good for one. By the way, if you joined other webinars, those are almost always also approved for one. And if you are new here and want to go watch those, you can still get credit for things that happened in the past if you participate. And so we'll go from there. Some agenda items for today, very quick introductions as usual. We'll talk about how your week is going. We'll talk about really understanding older donors and putting it in a broader context of their lifetime. We'll talk about some of the trends influencing older donors. We'll talk about some of the strategies for year-end fundraising. We'll talk specifically about qualified charitable distributions, how they're changing, some of the possible legislation in Congress and what that could mean. And then we'll do some next steps in Q&A. If at any point you have questions along the way, there is a separate Q&A function to the chat function. Just go there, type in your question, we'll get to it at the end. So quick intros. My name is Patrick. I'm really lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill, alongside my wonderful co-founder, Jenny, who is just great. And then we are really lucky to work with almost 100 folks from around the country, raising nearly $4 billion in planned gifts and in a whole bunch of other transformational giving. And so lots of designers and lawyers and researchers and other folks. And a lot of these people put a lot of work into this presentation. So I want to make sure credit is given where credit is due. One other thing we like to do sometimes is just give thank you gifts for those of you that have joined. And so not to everybody, because that would be super expensive. We have 550 folks signing on now, and that number is climbing pretty quickly. But for 20 folks, we're going to send one of my favorite books. This book is called The Design of Everyday Things. Just make a note in the survey if you'd like us to send you a copy. Tell us where to send it, give us the address, etc. Why is this book so great? A lot of fundraising and a lot of what we do here is actually a design process. How do we make the process of giving easy and intuitive and exciting for people? And taking a design thinking lens to this can be really, really useful certainly in our work, in a lot of your work across the board. And so thinking, how do people actually interact with us as fundraisers? How do people interact with our websites? How do people interact with our messages? How do people interact with our organizations writ large? And a really good start here is actually thinking about design generally. And so this book by Don Norman is one of the classic books in design. It's also one of the really most accessible books for that. And looking at things like, why are teapots shaped the way they are? What would make a better teapot? Why are door handles? What makes a door handle a good door handle or a bad door handle? What makes a piece of paper useful or not? And so thinking about starting to take a design lens on all of this will actually really help spark some imagination and hopefully both appropriate for your work, but then also in the rest of your life, thinking about where a little bit of design thinking might help. All right, so enough about that book, great book. How's your week going? A couple things to note. Generally, happiness is still the dominant feeling. That was not true until basically the beginning of 2021. If you look at this graph over time, starting basically at the dawn of pandemic in March of 2020. Down a little bit from last week, but so is anxiety. Loneliness is up a little bit too. And so I just want to name that. Not very high, much lower than it was previously, but maybe a good reminder to look out for other folks in the community. We also asked about how confident people are feeling about hitting their goals this year, looking at this confidence interval over time, and a bit down from last week. So about average overall. Last week was a little bit higher, this week's a little bit lower. We'll keep an eye on this, and hopefully some of the work we're going to do today in the next hour will help you feel a little bit more confident around hitting your goals. So let's talk about understanding older donors. And before we get into what do we do about them, let's make sure we know who they are. We're using shared language across the board. So let's see if we get these slides going. We asked you how you think about donors over 65. And words like generous, committed, loyal was a big one. Savvy was a big one. Legacy, dedicated, engaged. Some words like cautious, untapped, impact, etc. So, but generally really positive feelings towards this group, and occasionally some notes of confusion around what to do. So as we talk about older donors, let's specify whom we're speaking of. So we have two generations here. First is our silent generation, born 1928 to 1945. These people right now are 76 to 93. Separately, we have our baby boomer generation. We talk a lot about those. Right now, these people are 57 to 75. They were born from 1946 to 1964. A couple things to note here. Baby boomer generation, much larger than the silent generation, partly because a decent number of folks in the silent generation have passed away. Also, just more births overall. And so really important. Because the baby boomer generation is displacing the silent generation as the quote unquote dominant group over 65, and the baby boomers are larger, the population of folks over 65 grew by 1/3 during the past decade, which is enormous, enormous growth. 34%, 13 million more folks over 65 in the United States than 10 years ago, to about 52 million people. So this is a very, very sizable number. Really, really important. This will continue. This trend, by the way, continues every day. There are about 10,000 people turning 65 every day. And so when you think about purchasing power, giving power, et cetera, this is becoming one of the dominant groups in America. Why did this happen? How did the baby boomers get so large? What actually is the baby boom? Well, in the United States, World War II ends roughly 1944, 1945. The way that pregnancy works means everyone wasn't giving birth until 1946. And you see this massive initial spike that continues all the way into about 1964. And so these are the folks that are growing old right now. You see big drop-offs after. That's the beginning of Gen X, smaller generation also. Drop-off before, that's the end of silent generation. And so those are smaller generations compared to the massive baby boomer population. In a few weeks, we're going to talk about millennials. Millennials are the echo of this. So the millennial population is larger than the Gen X population because their group of potential parents was larger than Gen X parents. Okay, some shared facts about folks over 65. These generations are decidedly more religious than later generations. 80% of boomers, 90% of silents identify through religion. Only 35% of millennials. I haven't seen Gen Z numbers, so if anyone has those, you can share them in the chat. They are less educated than younger generations. So only 10% of folks in the silent generation have a bachelor's degree from college or more. 25% of boomers, 40% millennials. So this is a real shift. They're more married, they have more children. Many are now grandparents. So 2/3 of boomers, 83% of folks in the silent generation were married by the time they were 37, compared to only 46% of millennials. So massive shifts in the way that marriage is happening. 58% of boomer women were moms between the ages of 20 and 35, compared to less than half of millennial women. So again, some big shifts. And then they went through just remarkable tumult and change in their lifetime. So their childhoods were shaped by Cold War and McCarthyism. They grew up amid the civil rights movement, cultural shifts of the 50s and 60s and 70s. They fought in and protested against the Vietnam War. They were the first generation to see things like color TV and cable and internet and the first iPhone, right? So all of these things happened in quick succession over their lifetime, which is pretty dramatic. So technological change is one of the dominant markers of this generation. Let's dive in a little bit more even to understand what the life of a 75-year-old American is. So someone who is 75 was born in 1946. They were born immediately after World War II ends. Chances are that at least their father may have been a returning GI, at least in the United States. At age 6, it's 1952. They would run what are called duck and cover drills around the nuclear war during the Cold War. If you guys have ever seen this, they're crazy. You have these turtles who are animated icons, basically teaching children what to do in the event of nuclear war. And basically, you duck and you get under things. You duck in an alley, you duck under your desk, et cetera. And it's wild to see these videos that are very much aimed at 6-year-olds about potential nuclear holocaust. Age 17, color TV becomes more mainstream, and John F. Kennedy's assassinated. This is one of the sort of big memories of high school for someone like this. In 19, that actually may not be, that math isn't quite correct. Martin Luther King is assassinated. So that's more like they're 22 at that point, not 19, excuse me. At 23, the first man walks on the moon in Vietnam draft starts. So recall, it's only a few years since color TV goes mainstream, and we're already sending folks on the moon. At age 28, Nixon resigns and the oil embargo is underway. So some of the skepticism towards government is reinforced here. At age 38, 1984, again, not that long after we're walking on the moon, the first Apple Mac computer, which is really the dawn of personal computing in the United States in terms of a mainstream way. Age 47, America Online gains popularity and the internet goes mainstream. 2 years earlier, actually, AOL had IPO'd. So it was a meaningful company by 1991 when these folks were only 45. So let's dwell on this for just a second before we dive in. That means that they're 47, they probably have 18 years of deep professional life, maybe much more left. And we're already using internet, we're already using AOL. So this is much more a tech-savvy generation than people often give it credit for. At 55, 9/11 happens. At this point, cell phones are ubiquitous. At 61 in 2007, the first Black president is elected. The first iPhone is released, and all of the changes that happen with smartphones begin to happen. At 69, Supreme Court rules in favor of gay marriage. 74, COVID, don't have to tell you about that. At 75, there's 75 in 2021, first female vice president is inaugurated, first obviously female president or vice president they've seen in their lifetime. And you can see the massive shifts that happen year after year after year. Some of you are this age or close to it, you will have remembered all of this. Others of you, it's helpful to think about older donors here. It is also striking, as someone who is not close to 75, to think about the level of shifts that those folks saw and to begin to imagine what does the next 30 years look like. When we look at the causes that boomers and matures, which is another word for silence in this graph, do things like causes and local social service are extremely high. Worship and local social services. And you can see how much farther down worship is for Gen X, for Gen Z. Millennials tend to be a little bit more, at least religious giving oriented than Gen X in this context. Things like emergency relief, health, et cetera, going forward. When we ask people what percentage of their donor base is over 65, what we see here is that 12% of you, it's 75 to 100%. So almost all of your donors are in this age bracket. And then when you take into the next group, 35%, say 50 to 75%, so more than half and up to 3/4 say these are a huge portion of our donors. 25 to 50%, another 19%, and then only 7.7% say less than a quarter. So what you can see is this is a dominant group What this hides, by the way, is this is percentage of donors. That money coming from this group is even higher, obviously. So let's talk about some trends influencing older donors right now. Tax changes keep affecting giving. This is really important. And this is one of the big things that's happening both across the sector and within older donors. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 doubled the standard deduction for the tax years 2018 to 2025. What that means, well, one other note is that it capped itemized deductions for state and local taxes at $10,000 a year. It also, by the way, capped the mortgage deduction at a certain amount. So most taxpayers now get bigger breaks from taking standard deductions than they do from itemizing deductions like charitable contributions. Tax changes have this massive effect. So if you look at 2017, this is an immediate effect. In 2017, 30% of American tax filers itemized deductions. 1 year later, that was down to 10%. So only 10% of Americans itemize on their taxes now. That means they are looking for more tax-savvy ways to give. Plus, there are a couple of other big things that you should know could be coming down the pike, but are not definite. So I just want to make sure we all know that. The House Ways and Means Committee just proposed tax changes that would affect many wealthy donors. Capital gains may increase, making stock giving even more important. Changes to certain trusts using taxable estates could make estate planning and planned giving even more important. And then big changes could come to retirement accounts. We'll talk about that in a moment. That's really, really important for older donors as well. So that's one. We're seeing a lot of regulatory shift. Second trend, donors may still be feeling more isolated. So nearly 14 million Americans over 65, 28% of that population, so a very sizable chunk, live by themselves. The AARP and Kaiser Family Foundation found that 43% of American adults experience loneliness either sometimes or frequently. So this is a very, very large problem to address among this whole demographic. A lack of social connection and brain stimulation is associated with higher risks of something like heart disease, dementia, even premature death. So some of our work here is going to be shifted based on COVID, on Delta, et cetera. We asked you, do you expect to have in-person meetings with older donors this winter? And what we see here is 37% say yes, 19% say we're not currently, but we may, 31% say we're not doing it at all, and then 13% say we don't know. So there's a lot of thought here now about how are we safely doing visits? Are we doing visits? Are those folks comfortable? Are we comfortable traveling? Is our organization comfortable and spending money to have folks be on the road, either in planes and hotels or even just driving around? So this is a big unknown going into the end of the year. We asked you also whether you expect to have in-person events with older donors this winter. Half of you say no, hard no, no in-person events with older donors. 10% don't know. 15% say yes, we're holding an event, but we may cancel. We're making backup plans. And then less than a quarter say yes, we're definitely having this. So this is a really big shift compared to our life in 2017 or 2018 or 2019. And then we asked you personally, just to get a better sense of what Americans are doing. Are you traveling to see family during the holidays? Less than half say yes. 21% still holding out to make a decision, and a third say no. Obviously, there are lots of other reasons why people don't travel besides COVID, but just wanted to share this as well. Big trend number 3, a rapid shift to technology and online giving. So before COVID, 73% of 65 plus Americans were regular internet users. 68% of boomers and 40% of silents owned a smartphone in 2019. Since the spread of COVID, internet and phone usage has shot up enormously among all cohorts. These generations use social media, connect with friends and family. They also are spending a ton of money online. So one stat I saw recently was that the entire growth in e-commerce over the last 2 years was driven by increased spending by this cohort. Things like clothing, which people thought we would never buy online, shoes, and then things like mortgages, new bank accounts, buying and selling stock online is really shifting in this cohort. And that's one of the most meaningful shifts that will really filter into fundraising over the next 2 years. In some ways, it already has. So these donors are also going online to make major gifts. The average value of online giving increased from 2019 to 2020. So online giving via an intermediary, for example, giving from an IRA or donor advised fund, up 17%. Online stock giving, up 21%. Online giving directly to nonprofits, up 24%. And so part of this is more donors are moving online. Part of it is that the wealthier donors are moving online too. So it's not just that the gifts are going up, it's the amount of money is going up, because you're seeing this shift. You know, the $8, the $8, $10, $20, $80 donors, they were going online 8 years ago. Now the major givers are online as well. So we're going to dive into what we actually do about it, and we've got 5 of these strategies that we're going to share with you right now. The first one is, remember, okay, now we have a much more online group. Doesn't mean we're not sending direct mail. Doesn't mean we're not making phone calls. What it does mean is it opens up more effective avenues with a multi-channel approach. So as giving shifts online, and as even those who are not giving online are still behaving and interacting online, you often want to meet 65 plus donors where they're at. 80% of boomers, up to almost 40% of silents regularly use Facebook. 33% of nonprofits are increasing social media in general, but you can also think about how to specifically target your donors with social advertising. So a couple of thoughts here. Let's say that you're already sending direct mail to older donors. Great. You may want to think about engaging them with Facebook ads as well. You can target by location. You can use city or zip codes. You can retarget, meaning cookie, folks who visit your website. So if someone goes to your donate page, or goes to your learn more page, or goes to your ways to give page, that is a really good idea to start showing them a little bit more frequently about your organization. There's also the ability, if you have email addresses for older donors or any of your donors, you can upload this email list to Facebook and then only show advertising to those folks. So that's also really, really valuable. The ways that you can take out these ads reflect the different ways you engage donors. So it doesn't have to be, hey, give us money right now. It can be things like highlighting impact reports, or a blog post, or a video message. All of these things are just ways to build relationships and build reminders that you exist and you're doing really important work in the world, not necessarily direct response giving, which is a little bit of a shift for a lot of organizations. These multiple touch points will help you stay top of mind as donors make end of year giving decisions. Strategy 2 here is getting more personal. So as we slow events, as we slow visits, but also we're now dealing with even more tech-savvy donors because they've really interacted over video to such a great degree over the last 2 years, we can lean into video message as one of the most powerful ways to connect with people. If you already send holiday cards to top donors, this is a really good thing to layer on top of that. Make a list of your top 50 donors. And this way, this list, by the way, may be per giving officer. So if your team's got 6 giving officers, you might want to think about 300 top donors, not just 50. Use your phone, use your computer, very quick, doesn't have to be professional, 30 or 60-second video for each of them. Thank them for the gifts, mention the impact they're having, include enough specifics to make it personal, and then just send it. Don't do 3 takes, just get it out there. Make it feel informal, personal, etc. You can upload them to YouTube or another platform, unlisted, of course, so only they need the link, and then email it to them. Consider texting them as well. Almost everyone opens their text messages. Text messages have close to 100% open rate. Most of your emails are going to have like an 18% open rate. Plus, the personalization level of the video will align with the personal feelings of a text. So you're totally welcome to do this. Third strategy, if your donors own appreciated stock, this is the smartest way for them to give. Now, who owns appreciated stock? The older somebody is, the more likely they are to have bought stock earlier in their lives, and the more likely that is to have appreciated. So your stock donors, across the board, there are tons of new millennial stock donors, yet your older donors are going to be the strongest cohort here across the board. It's one of the best types of gifts you can get. We talk about this all the time, but it's so important. We're going to mention again. Organizations that accept appreciated assets grow 5 times faster than those that only accept cash. So that is one of the single most important statistics in all of fundraising. That's why there's a lot of nonprofits that are taking part in something called Stock Monday, which I'm going to explain now. So what is Stock Monday? What does this mean? It is a tax smart giving day on Monday, the 29th. This is the day before Giving Tuesday on November 30th. The goal is not necessarily to get gifts on the 29th, it's to prime donors, to remind them that they can make gifts of stock on Giving Tuesday and in their end of year giving. Hundreds of nonprofits are already doing this. They'll email their donors on this day and share all the benefits of giving stock over cash. So why might you participate in this? Well, we have shown through our research that nonprofits that send out content leading up to Giving Tuesday perform better than those folks who only send content on Giving Tuesday. And stock gifts are 100 times larger than cash gifts on average. So if you can move folks from giving cash to giving stock, you will get dramatically larger gifts. And by the way, these gifts are so much better for donors. Reminding donors of the tax benefits of stock right before Giving Tuesday will drive a lot more of these gifts. And this is really, really important because not only are you getting this 100 times larger gift the next day or the end of year, switching behavior means you'll get larger gifts from the same people going forward. Quick sample email here. Dear Chris, as you already know, tomorrow is Giving Tuesday, one of the most important days of the year for animal rescue. We hope to raise $1 million, which will provide a whole year of food for the shelter. But today is Stock Monday, and I want to share a type of gift that many of our dedicated supporters, like you, are using to make the most of their year-end donations, donating shares of appreciated stock. You'll save on 2 types of taxes and make an even bigger impact. It only takes a few minutes to make a gift here. There's 2 types of taxes, by the way. We're talking about capital gains and income tax. Super important, very clear, right? Really clear, simple language. Doesn't scare people off. Having an even bigger impact on the thing they care about shows this win-win that's very important. Jumpstarting your end of year giving by celebrating Stock Monday, maximizing your impact for helping AMA puppies while minimizing your tax burden. I hope you find this information useful as you consider all your options for giving, right? So this is very much a service to your donors to help educate them on smarter giving, super, super important and really valuable. Okay, so that's Stock Monday, super important. Susan has a question. You don't explain the 2 kinds of taxes to the donor. Oftentimes the tool that they would, the link they would click on might explain that. Another way to talk about this would say, you can save on both capital gains and income taxes at the same time if you wanted to make it a little bit more complex. So good question there. Strategy 5, going big on QCDs. So qualified charitable distributions, also known as IRA rollovers, are by far the fastest growing type of philanthropy. They've grown 3 times since 2017 due to changes, tax changes, demographics. For many seniors, this will be the single best way to give. So let's talk about what going big on QCDs during end of year giving looks like. So your reminder, gifts from an IRA, also known as IRA charitable rollovers. This is money transferred directly from an IRA account to a 501c3. It is not money taken out and then written. It has to go directly to a charity. Donors must be 70 and a half to give a QCD. They can give up to $100,000 annually, tax-free. There is more than $7 trillion and potentially much, much more in IRAs. You can see how big the average account of someone over 65 and over 70 is here. 216,000 on average from 65, 69, 226,000, 70 or older. So really large amounts. Folks above 70 in this sense in 2017. So these accounts have gotten dramatically larger with stock market growth. We're at $250,000. And so there is a lot of money sitting here. Half of all Americans over 60 have an IRA, including almost all of your wealthy donors, right? So when we think about that half, it's not evenly distributed, sort of randomized. Folks who are giving you more money already or making donations at all, more likely to have an IRA. And so what is important about this? Well, required minimum distributions are back. What is an RMD, a required minimum distribution? It is the amount the IRA owner, must take out of their IRA after the age of 72, says the IRS. If the distributions are not taken, there are massive penalties. But the CARES Act, remember this passed in I think April or May of 2020, eliminated RMDs for last year, but they're back in 2021. And so donors use qualified charitable distributions to meet their required minimum distributions, they use qualified charitable distributions to meet their required minimum distributions and save on taxes. If IRA owners didn't take a distribution last year, their IRA will have more money in it and they'll have a larger RMD this year. Plus, there are twice as many people taking RMDs for the first time. And if these donors don't need their IRA funds, they're really good prospects for QCD giving. Reminder, why do these work? Why are they so great? Money in an IRA is pre-tax. It will always be taxed, even if the donor passes away. Even if you are below the estate tax threshold and you pass this on to your child pays income tax on it. Post-tax money, meaning money that's already been taxed, is way more valuable to the donor and should be conserved. So since they still have to meet their RMD, it is better to give from an IRA than to give cash. Better to give pre-tax money than post-tax money. Stocks and QCDs are also much better for nonprofits because you end up getting much larger gifts when people give this way from exactly the same donors. Here's a little bit of timing note so you understand it. A couple things to know. Those big spikes happen in end of year giving. So November, December are the times that people are giving the biggest number of QCDs. What you can also see is, boy, this year is dramatically higher than last year in terms of QCD giving. I mean, look at, early September or mid-September QCD giving is almost at the level of end of year giving last year. These types of gifts are growing incredibly quickly and will be a major part of giving for most folks over 70 and a half this end of year season. So what do you want to do about this? First thing to know is that you want to get moving on QCDs right now. 30% of annual giving happens in December. QCDs have to be made before the end of the year to count as 2021 tax deductible donations. So you need to start talking about QCDs with donors right now. Plus, building the habit of QCDs is hugely helpful. These tend to become a recurring annual gift. So what are we doing here? A lot of people make QCDs at the same time every year. So once a donor gives you a QCD, they're more inclined to continue giving like that. In fact, 55% of QCDs in 2020 came from previous donors. So what you want to do is reach out to your previous QCD donors a few times before end of year so they have time to make a gift. You also might want to do this. You want to send them personal reminders to renew their gift. It's an effective way to build year-over-year revenue from the same donors. You also know that they can use, you can let them know that they need to meet their RMDs this year. Another quick thing beyond end of year giving that I want to note is that sometimes people make it in June or April or August, whatever. And if they did that last year, make sure you get to them 6 weeks before that date, because they're beginning to think about this. And chances are they may have many options of organizations to give to, or they may be considering how much do I want to take, how much do I want to give away? And you want to make sure you're there before that decision gets made, not after the fact. Tactic 2, age data is really important. If you don't have age data in your email, you may want to send out a quick survey to supporters. This will demonstrate that you want to hear from your community, and you can include some demographic questions to update your database and figure out who are likely prospects for QCD giving. If you don't have age data and you can't send a survey, include QCDs as a way to give in your year-end fundraising appeals. You can do this by including them as one of several ways to give, or adding postscripts that call out supporters over 75. By the way, some of you are thinking right now, I am scared to ask people how old they are in a survey. It feels a little bit invasive. That's a fair thought. Here's a suggestion. In the survey, would you like to hear more about each of the following types of giving? Planned giving, giving stock, giving from your donor advised fund, giving a qualified charitable distribution. Parentheses, this type is open to donors who are over 70 and a half. So anyone who clicks that is you now know how old they are, and they're interested in QCDs, right? So that may be one way to get around it if you're not comfortable asking how old folks are. If you're a college, by the way, just ask them, and you don't have data, what year they graduated college, or some other things like that are possible. Here's an example of just working this in, right? So remember that early graph about how many of your donors are over 75, and then you can think about, wow, those people actually give a lot more than the folks under 65 or under 70. And so most of you are going to have a pretty broad base of folks over 70 with IRAs. Just throw it in a PS. If you're asking for cash, you want to make sure you're giving these options for those people, because that way you'll get a much larger gift from the same person that was going to write you a $100 check. Tactic 4, if you do have age data, make sure you have a list of people over 70. You want to send this audience emails or direct mail about the tax benefits of giving QCDs, deadlines for RMDs, et cetera. Donor education is an act of kindness and an incredibly effective way to engage donors in a smarter way to give. You can even let them know that it will be useful for any of their year-end giving. Whenever we talk about giving, not just for our organization, but for any of the giving they might do, people's ears really open up, right? Because most folks may be giving to you but they're also giving to their college and their church or their synagogue or their mosque and the Nature Conservancy and some other places. And so when you can help make them thoughtful about giving across the board, it really builds a strong rapport with you and means they're going to be giving smarter to you as well. Another example here from St. Mary's College. St. Mary's is fortunate enough to have age data because they roughly have those records from graduation years, et cetera. And so this is a whole piece here designed to making sure that older donors know about this. You can make a gift directly from your IRA. Most Americans don't itemize deductions, but you can save on income taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So really, really smart stuff from the St. Mary's team here. And this is going to generate a lot of giving. And a lot of those people might have given anyway in much smaller amounts. So now you've started to shift people from annual giving to major giving just by changing the way that they're doing it. Okay, really big news that may or may not happen. So don't hold us to this, but this is really important. The House Ways and Means Committee in the House of Representatives, controlled by Democrats, is proposing massive increases to RMDs for large accounts and high income earners. Remember, RMDs are the amount the government says you got to take it out this year. You can't leave it in here, otherwise we're going to really penalize you. Those with incomes over 400 or 450, depending on filing status, and combined retirement accounts of 10 million plus would have an RMD equal to 50% of the amount they have over 10 million. This is going to be a huge year if this passes, not this year, but next year. If this passes, this will mean enormous sums coming out of IRAs getting taxed at a very high tax bracket for these folks. If you have more than $20 million in a retirement account, you have to empty the account down to 20 million. So huge sums coming out of it. There was a whole uproar because a gentleman named Peter Thiel, who's one of the founders of PayPal, some of you know him, apparently has a $5 billion IRA, which means all of that's growing tax-free. Now that's a real problem if you're trying to collect revenue to pay for social programs. And so there's a lot of shifts here happening, looking at different ways to go after retirement accounts. It will also spur a lot of philanthropy if this passes. So, all right, so that is a lot of what's happening and what you should be doing about it. We've covered a ton in a short amount of time. A couple of resources here. One, a reminder of this book, which is just excellent to really sort of change the way you think about a lot of objects, processes, systems that you interact with. So my colleague Amanda, I believe, will drop a survey in the chat now. Just make a note in the survey if you would like a copy of this book, and we'll give it to 20 folks. Also, please make sure you type in your accurate address. The last thing we want to do is send a book to nowhere and just have it lost in the shuffle. Other resources here, we have a whole template email around Stock Monday, and so we've done a lot of the work to incorporate best practices there as well. And then a report on qualified charitable distributions that goes much, much deeper into this if you're curious to learn more. And as a side note, if you're newer to philanthropy or newer to QCDs, this is going to be one of the dominant things in the next 10 years. And so you really want to take some time to get smart about it now. Thank you, Amanda, by the way, for making a note for dropping the survey in the link, survey link in the chat. One other note in the survey as well is we're going to do a short 30-minute demonstration, not this Thursday, but next Thursday with my colleagues, Cassie and Alyssa, who are wonderful, and they'll actually walk through a bunch of technology that a lot of nonprofits are using around stock giving, around QCD giving for older donors, and around planned giving. So all of those, that'll be pretty quick. Usually it's pretty fun. People really appreciate it. So if you want to join that, just make a note. Feel free to eat lunch during that as well. And then lastly, if you want a one-on-one session about any of these tools, you can make a note for that. We'll connect you with somebody who's pretty amazing over at FreeWill. All right, I'm going to take a 60-second break to go through all the questions that you asked. I'm sure there were lots of them. Possible, we made a mistake or two, and folks will always correct there, which is quite helpful. So I'm going to look at the questions. If you can use this 30 seconds to fill out the survey, that would mean a lot to us, and we'll go from there. we have a lot of questions. Let's get started with a couple. First question, Allison says, roughly 10,000 donors turn 65 or 75 every day. Slides of 75, which is the right answer. It's actually both. So this whole generation is shifting and growing roughly the same. So you're seeing a lot of folks move into 65 and 75. My guess is I would trust the slides, but each of these age groups is drifting up pretty quickly. The biggest marker there, by the way, is that oldest baby boomer, the 1946, because it's such a transition from people born in 1945, right? There's so few people born in 1945 compared to 1946, and then it tends to sort of average out over the next few years. And so that's a really, really big shift. Marie asks, what is the best way to ask donors how old they are? We did go through that one option around in a survey asking whether donors who are, do they want to know more about giving types available to people over 70? Really, really valuable stuff. And so that's a good option. Sometimes you can say things like, hey, different types of vehicles are actually open to people of different ages. How old are you? And so you need to make sure you give a good reason for it instead of just saying, hey, tell me how old you are. And you always want to have things like I prefer not to answer as well. Rebecca asks, how is a major gift defined on slide 33? Is it any amount above 5,000, for example? Oftentimes this is reported by nonprofits. And so a smaller nonprofit may think about major giving as a 5K gift or an 8K gift. If you are Notre Dame or Yale or the Guggenheim, your major giving level might be 100,000, might even be higher. And so it really depends for your organization. But these types of gifts at each level are all moving online to a pretty big degree. Judy and Jeannie both asks, can you supply us with text to use for our Stock Monday message? Yes, so we've spent a ton of time looking at all the research around best practices here and making sure that we're super clear on tax benefits, et cetera. Make sure you fill out the survey. We will send out templates for that as well. Deborah asks, we're fairly new and have never taken stock or QCD gifts. How do we learn about this? Deborah, great question. There are two things. So QCD gifts are a little bit easier to take if you've never taken them. You don't need anything special. So you will get a check mailed to you by the QCD custodian or potentially a wire transfer in some cases, but mostly a check. Nothing different needs to happen. There are a bunch of resources on our site. You can also do a little bit of Googling to just get better at QCDs. It is really important. A lot of professional fundraisers don't know as much about them as they could, in part because they're so new. And we've had pretty busy few years, still catching up. Stock is different, right? So most of the more mature organizations on the call will have their own brokerage accounts, and they prefer to get money directly to those brokerage accounts, meaning the shares of stock transfer immediately. If you are a smaller nonprofit, a newer nonprofit, and you don't have a brokerage account set up, and you're not sure you want to, there are tools like Co-Catalyst, which we partner with, and that will actually liquidate the stock for you. There's some fee associated with it, but it means you don't have to set up a brokerage account. So there's an associated nonprofit there, it takes the stock directly, turns it into cash, sends you cash as well. Belinda asks, if you can give up to $100,000 tax-free from your IRA in a year, what happens if your RMD is over $100,000? Can you give that to charity? Is it taxed, et cetera? Okay, so reminder why QCDs are so great. QCDs, they don't actually increase your deductions. They just decrease your taxable income. So whether or not you itemize deductions, you get tax savings from giving a QCD. So let's say that my RMD is $200,000 a year. Now I am not over 70. I also don't have a massive IRA account, but we can all pretend here. First 100,000 goes directly to my favorite charity, right? So it goes directly to, let's say, Human Rights Watch, no taxes, straight out. I don't even have to, it doesn't even show up, I think, on my tax receipts. Second 100,000, I take, and like the same way a paycheck happens, some of that money will go into income tax before it even hits my bank account. Some of it will come to me. I'm then welcome to donate the portion I have, and I will get an income tax break, but it's not as tax efficient as that first part. So you can take more out of your RMD and then give it away the same way you could give any other cash or holdings you had. And so that is the difference. I hope that's clear. Feel free to ask if it isn't. Oh, great question. Okay, so Mary asks, when we receive a stock gift, which is sometimes, and hopefully it will increase, we're never given the donor's name. How do we figure this out? This is a massive problem. It is a massive problem for QCDs and stocks, and actually donor advised funds as well. And so we have some really strong recommendations around what to do here. There are some very particular things you want to do on your website to make sure you're capturing information before revealing the brokerage information that somebody will want to use to donate stock. Now, another way to think about this is, why is it a giant problem for you not to receive the name of this stock donor? One, you can't thank the donor, so they're mad, right? Because they may have given you the largest gift they've ever given you. They don't know that you don't know, and so you can imagine they're pretty frustrated. Means two, they're not going to give again, or they're not going to give in a big way again because you never said thank you. Three, you don't know where the gift should go. So if you're a college or a hospital and you have all these sub-funds, no idea where it's going to go. Four, you can't give them tax receipts, which is a giant problem. So all of these things are really, really important to solve. And there's a bunch of sort of technological best practices to solve that as well. Super, super important. All right, so it is coming up on 12:50. We have another 36 questions we could ask, but instead we'll pause here so that you guys all get 10 minutes before your next meeting or event. Couple final things, please, if you don't mind, just take 30 seconds to fill out the survey in Zoom. It always tells us how we did, what we should do better, what else you want to learn about. Really helpful. On October 12th, we are going to chat about millennial giving, some strategies for fundraising and beyond. There was a question we didn't answer, by the way, that was basically like, well, what about Gen X? Actually, if you go to the past webinars, we did a really deep dive on fundraising from Gen X, and so you should be welcome to watch that as well. And then if there's anything you want to tell us, any creative ideas you want to share, any outreach that you're particularly proud of, especially around millennials as we go into October 12th, that we might feature in one of these, that would be great to see as well. So just patrick@freewill.com and just feel free to reach out. So another really big thank you to you all. I know there's a lot going on right now. Pushing yourself to learn more is a really great service to your mission, to your organizations. And so just delighted to have spent so much time with all of you. So thank you again. Look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks about millennials, which is going to be a whole other topic. Some really, really interesting stuff there as well. And good luck this weekend and the rest of this week, and look forward to seeing you soon.